you'll see me in a second. Okay, so just bear with me a second. Now, I can't cover all. I can't cover it all. Can't cover it all the different areas. Okay. So what I'm going to do is cover what's been raised by your questions. Okay, so these are the real answers to the questions that came in. Bearing in mind that I had over 500 come in the last 3 days. Okay, so if you worried and you think, well, surely, did Heidi look at my question? Has anyone seen my question? We've seen your questions. Okay, we have seen your questions, and I'm going to get all emotional in a minute. Many of those have been deeply moving. Okay, deeply moving. So my heart goes out to you, and I'm very grateful for that level of trust and honesty in that what you've given as far as that's concerned. Amazing amount of trust and honesty, and absolutely I'm committed to doing my best as far as that's concerned. So I'm going to cover what's really been raised by your questions, the core elements of those questions. Okay, so the essence of those is, what's the essence of those questions? What is the real thing that you're asking here? The real question that really comes up is, why do I feel powerless? Why do I feel powerless? Why do I feel powerless to change something when actually it seems to be all right for everybody else? And the other kind of really strong element of those questions is, what do I create in my life when I don't know how to create? Lots of these things in my life are about, I should be able to create this, I should be to do this, to do that, to change this, to do that. But I don't know how to create. I don't know how to make that transition. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to find it. Create could be, how do you find your sense of purpose? Where do you feel that you fit in? How do I create? You don't know how to create. So to start answering that, okay, so to start answering those two kind of key questions about how your life works is, first of all, we need to look at, how did you become a sensitive? What was that pathway? Okay, how did that happen? How did that happen in your life? Well, it would have happened in several ways. Okay, so for those of you who have got a low score, a low ACE score, so a low early adversity score, then this is the reason. And for those of you who've got higher ones, this is an additional reason, okay, why you have a strong level of sensitivity. That sensitivity is developed by maternal stress. Okay, so before you were born, what does that mean? Before you were born, your mother experienced prolonged worry. Okay, and you think, well, was she worried? Does she speak of being worried? Well, she was. Okay, she had something that was either going on in her life or had gone on in her own history, which created a persona of worry. Now, what happens as far as that's concerned? Well, that chronic prenatal stress, okay, so that chronic prenatal stress, as in what you experienced in the womb, destabilizes what's called the HPA axis. Okay, now I'm not going to get too technical as far as that's concerned, but just so that you're aware that it involves the endocrine system, but one of the primary areas that it involves is your adrenals. Okay, so if you've been tired all the time and you think, well, I have this funny old thing called chronic adrenal fatigue, I've experienced chronic fatigue in my life, I've had fibromyalgia, I've had mysterious things going on, and I don't understand why. Well, it could well be that your HPA axis was destabilized before you were born. Okay, so don't panic. Don't start panicking and going, whoa, what the hell do I do about this? Can I change this? Yes, you can change it. And obviously, as we go further into this session, I will explain exactly how you can change that. But what I'm saying is, it's not your fault. Okay, and it's not your mother's fault either. It's just the fact of life. Okay, and if that stress was chronic over a prolonged period of time, it destabilizes the HPA axis, which means, in short, that your body struggles to solve cortisol levels. Okay, cortisol is a stress hormone. So other areas may have been that there may have been depression. Okay, so your mother may have experienced depression, and looking at your scores, and so the major area, it came in third, depression. You experienced in your adult environment prior to the age of 18, that would be a strong indicator. Okay, so depression in the mother may actually trigger her HPA axis to circulate higher levels of cortisol. So there's higher levels of cortisol circulating in her own system. So in short, war in its many forms creates sensitive babies. So I'm saying war in its many forms, which can be an internal war, an external war, as in something highly stressful going on in your mother's environment when she was carrying you. Actual war, because a lot of you who completed the our questionnaire are second generation post-war babies. Okay, so there would have been some elements of war stored in the core of your mother's worry, all of those kind of things, and protection, and how she protects. So you can add to also that some of those epigenetic factors. Okay, so if we look at it in terms of your ancestors' worry, okay, so sensitivity can be developed as well through your ancestors' worry, the epigenetic factors. So if I explain that as, actually I have drawn something very basic, but I've drawn it in order to symbolize that, which is as a lotus flower. Okay, so if you look at it as a lotus flower, what does that mean? Well, it means that our DNA is actually, from the beginning, okay, from the beginning, our DNA, what we're made up of, is it's like a closed lotus flower. You know, the way I've looking at this is a way of understanding some of the research, and I've looked at an awful lot of research, and it's my way of interpreting some of these things for your understanding. Okay, so imagine it, your DNA as a closed lotus flower. Okay, so what happens is that the lotus flower is meant to open. Okay, so it's meant to open, and as it opens, you know, that DNA has some blemishes on it, that kind of stuff. So those are the things, that the epigenetic things that have been passed through generations. Epigenetics are the emotional markers that have been passed through generations, both positive and negative. So imagine that some of those petals stay closed and they can't open. Okay, those are what's called stress hormone receptors. So how stress is processed. So those can't open, they're stuck. Okay, they're stuck because childhood adversity is an example. So if you add that stress of childhood adversity on top of the sensitivity that your mother experienced, which then creates a disruption, a destabilization of the HPA axis, your adrenals, all that kind of stuff, what happens? Well, those petals can't open. Okay, why? Because the brakes are off. They can't open properly because the brakes are off. It's just, it stays closed. It can't open. Okay. And what does it mean? It means that the brain cannot then regulate your stress response. It can't regulate it properly, which is why sensitives experience overwhelm. And pretty much it makes your system sensitive. Now, this doesn't mean that it's a negative in any shape or form. What I'm doing is explaining why some of these things have occurred in your life and why they are things that you experience and why they are things to adjust and change. It doesn't mean that these are things that are unchangeable, okay? But my key points within these, as we go further in, is that it's not going to change without your input, okay? So if you're hoping for adjustments, if you're hoping for something to change on its own, it can't without your input, but it can change, okay? It can absolutely change. So you add that, you add the maternal stress, petals can't open because of some of those early adversity things. Add all that in terms of childhood adversity, you end up with profound changes in areas of the brain that govern how we recognize feelings, okay? So if you struggle with recognizing how you feel about something, especially when you have a stress about it, when you get stressed about it, you think, well, I don't know how I feel about it. I don't know. And you think, whoa, I should know, but I don't know. These are because the patterns have adjusted, they've changed, okay, from a normal route. It also means that you have struggled to voice what you want, okay? So at key areas and times in your life, and you get really annoyed with yourself and you get tongue-tied and you think, oh, why didn't I say that? What was the matter with me? I don't know. So these profound changes in areas governing the brain mean that we do this, okay? It means that we fail to recognize when we can voice what we want, and we fail to recognize our own feelings, okay, what we actually feel. So when you get that tongue-tied in important moments, it's not because it's you, okay? It also means that there is a struggle to empathize with other people, okay? Now, that doesn't impact you as an intuitive sensitive, okay? That doesn't impact you specifically as an intuitive sensitive because you know full well how to empathize with other people, okay? For you as a sensitive, you struggle with recognizing your feelings and voicing what you want, okay? You will find that that's tricky. You might say to me, well, actually, I'm pretty good at voicing what I want. Well, you'll do that when you're angry, but that's not actually voicing what you want, okay? It's getting angry, it's getting cross. You'll find that you don't necessarily do that until you get cross, okay? The empathy bit, and you think, well, actually, I do empathize with people. Well, there are people, you know full well, as we can see from the results in terms of, your interaction with difficult people, is that the empathy bit, those who've had adversity markers in their early experience, they're the narcissists, okay? What's a narcissist? Well, someone who has an inability to empathize, and also somebody who kind of pretty much takes pleasure in harming, upsetting, and causing you dismay. Why? Because they don't feel comfortable with acknowledging their own pain, so they like to create it and see it in another person, in short. So, as an example, if you were raised by a narcissist, you didn't have the normal encouragement that children should have. It was either preloaded, as in, well, you're not good enough unless you attain this, or you're this type of person, or you express yourself in this way in the world, so I can say I'm responsible for that. Or if you're raised by a narcissist, it can be in the opposite direction, which is completely destroyed and torn apart and made to feel inadequate and completely useless. Okay, so what happens with that is your inner world translates that as you're unlovable. It then says, well, actually it becomes programmed in there. Well, I'm unlovable then, you know. I feel helpless, hopeless, and completely unlovable. That's how you'll feel. Okay? So, Ruth Manius, who is a neuroscientist and a director of PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder research at the University of Ontario, says, this is what she says, is that your brain pathways are disrupted, okay? And it means that, in short, it means that your default mode, so the default mode that the brain should have of dum-de-dum-de-dum-de-dum, just kind of peaceful dum-de-dum-de-dum-de-dum, is weak because it can't self-regulate. It worries, it's wound up high. If the HPA axis is upset, it's wound up high. You feel stress in an intense way. That's when you start going into the overwhelm, all of those kind of things. And working on your internal world, those may have lessened considerably, okay? Considerably. This is not a, oh, I can't do anything about it scenario. This is absolutely, you can very much do something about it, and I will go into that. But in essence, you're kind of dum-de-dum-de-dum, that sort of humming along in the brain that happens normally for people is weak. Therefore, your sense of self and your sense of peace is weak, or it's significantly weakened, okay? It will have been significantly weakened by all of these factors. And the higher your score, higher your ACE score, the more that will have a profound impact, particularly on your sense of powerlessness. So then what happens? Damage occurs in the default network. Okay, so the default network is whenever there's something's happening, and the brain should go back to dum 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 dum. There's damage there, so it doesn't go back to a dum 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 dum. It goes back to it doesn't know. Okay, so repeated trauma creates a sense of powerlessness. It means that your dum 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 doesn't activate. Okay, so as an example, now this is going into the childhood adversity stuff now. Okay, so really understanding the core of what those experiences have created in your system, not to blame anyone, not to punish anyone, but actually to really understand how you can adjust it and change it. Okay, as I explained earlier, my score is a 7, which is high. It's a high score, a high childhood adversity score. And my particular areas should mean that I should find life exceptionally difficult, very, very hard. I certainly shouldn't have a highly functional relationship. I shouldn't have happy children. I shouldn't have all kinds of things, okay? I shouldn't be able to do what I do. I should be barely functional. In fact, all of the autoimmune issues that I have, I should really not be properly functional at all. Okay, so I'm not saying to you that these aren't things that you can adjust, and you can't say to me, oh, what, Heidi, you're different. I'm not. Far from it. I'm not different at all. What I'm telling you this for is to give you the steps, the really clear ways, really clearly and strongly defined ways. I'm doing this now. You think, well, Heidi, why are you telling me this now? And I wish I'd known about this eons time ago. You weren't ready. Okay, you would have run from it. You would have said, oh, that's too uncomfortable. I don't want to know. I don't want to go there. I wouldn't have, you would have zoned out and gone, and maybe you have during this session, you would have gone, whoa, we're professionals at zoning out. Okay, because our whole system, the HPA axis, the amygdala, part of the brain that experiences fear goes, whoa, and goes, boof, out. We're off. We're really experts. We're brilliant at it. Okay? That's what daydreaming is. It's a disassociation. It's removal from physicality because something feels trauma, it feels stressed. So when children can't flee, okay, and they can't fight. So they can't flee and they can't fight. When children can't flee and fight, they freeze. They freeze, and they may have frozen on repeated occasions. Okay, so if you've come from significant adversity or even mild adversity, because again with the sensitized system, you're going to feel it. It's going to be there. Okay, if you felt that there is a threat, if your system has felt the threat there and it's felt that it can't flee, it can't fight, it's frozen. Okay, it went whoa, and it stayed there. Your nervous system stayed there. So the brain setting then becomes something where it's set to immobilize. So as soon as your system feels stress, it's set then to immobilize. It's going, whoa, freeze, okay? To feel emotionally immobilized. Hence the reason for powerlessness, which is to feel that it can't do anything, doesn't know what to do, doesn't know how to change something. It desperately wants to, so the other part of you, the adult part of you is saying, well, hang on a second, surely I can do this, surely I can change this. And then the whole system goes, woof, slams on those brakes and it freezes and you have no idea what to do or how to change it. Hence that strong sensation of trying to override, and you've done that lots of times, and then your body's tired. You can't override, you get cross with yourself, or it goes into this, well, I just can't do it. It goes into this helplessness of, there's no way, I've tried. I've really, really tried. Okay? So when, as an example, a parent is the source of the trauma, okay, the child's brain is saying, run from this person, okay, because that's the normal fight-flight response. Run from this person to survive. And it's saying, at the same time, run to this person. So run from them and run to them, as they are my survival. So when the trauma is directed from a parent, that's what the child's brain does, okay? And trauma doesn't have to be, you could say to me, well, Heidi, I wasn't physically harmed. Mine was more verbal abuse. Mine was, it was more, you could say, parental separation. You could say it was a scenario where, of parental incarceration, as in prison. So actually, they didn't hurt me, so to speak. Didn't physically hurt me. You could say, well, it didn't feel like, there was a physical component. Of course it's physical. The system still takes it on as trauma, okay? It still interprets it as trauma. So when a parent is the source of the trauma, the child's brain is saying, run from this person to survive. And it's also saying, run to this person. They are my survival. So I have to do as I'm told. I have to be this good girl, a good boy. I have to be this good person, because in order to survive, I have to do this. Okay? Or it will be rebellion, whichever format it shows in. That's what the child's brain does. It goes, well, run and run too. Okay? So two circuits are activated. The one that says the flee, which is run away from, and the one that says, run to. This is my source of safety. This is my survival. So those two circuits have activated at the same time. The child can't do both. It cannot do both. So the brain cannot do those two things. So the default setting becomes freeze. Okay? So every time you come up against something in your life where you think, whoa, this way, that way, this way, that way, your default setting will become freeze. Okay? It will just go woof. No matter how much you try to change it, it will just go woof. And that results in that you'll disassociate. Okay? You'll disassociate from your feelings, or even maybe that was your experience as a child. Again, if you're anything like me, you tripped out of your body. You went somewhere else. You were off. You could feel yourself somewhere else, it was kind of tripping out of the body, going, whoa, this is too much. Woof, I'm off. So you disassociate. Then what do you do as an adult? You then have no idea how you feel. Okay? You might say to me, well, actually, I do. I feel that's the problem, Heidi. I feel too much. Yeah, well, you flip from one to the other, but it's not, you don't actually know how necessarily how you feel whilst you still have that freeze scenario as active. But the main question, as I said earlier in this session, I haven't got time to go through all of this. We could be here all day, all night. As far as if I was to go through everything, I'm answering this core question, which is, why do I feel so powerless? That's why. Okay. So then when your system's in freeze, everything becomes a threat. Happiness becomes a threat in case it means punishment. You can't be seen in case it's dangerous. Okay, why do you think weight is difficult to shift? Why do you think that it comes to this issue where you lose weight and then all of a sudden you find yourself sabotaging? Well, because your system's gone, well, I have to freeze. That's the only safety there is. You then find yourself going into this space of thinking, oh, I can't handle needy people. Neediness is distasteful. So you reject your own neediness and you reject it hugely in terms of other people. That's too damn uncomfortable when your system's in freeze. It cannot readily recognize. So those of you who ask me the questions are all about, well, hang on a second, is this why I mess up relationships? Why I can't find someone who I can really feel love? Well, when the system's in freeze, that's what we do. You cannot readily recognize dangerous and unhealthy situations or interactions. And you think, well, is that my intuition letting me down? No, it's not. It's not. It's that freeze mechanism that's still programmed there from very early on. Okay? Because that was the method of survival. So that's what happens. And you think, well, I've picked funny old relationships, really, ones I shouldn't have been around. Well, because then you cannot readily recognize dangerous or unhealthy situations or interactions. So it means that you stay in relationships that are chaotic and harmful because they seem to that brain freeze familiar and safe. And it's an understanding. Oh, yeah, I understand this one. That brain freeze has gone, oh, well, this is familiar and safe. I get this. I may not like it, but I get it, understand it. And then you find yourself veering, okay, with little warning from feeling completely numb, as in disassociated, to then, whoa, things are off on a high note. You veer from one to the other. And you'll also find yourself giving too much in relationships, whether that's to family or needy friends or that kind of thing. You find yourself giving too much because you're unattuned to your interior cues for boundaries. You'll find that happens, is that you think, you find yourself over-giving. That's why, as we looked at in terms of the second set of questions, I do that. I feel myself giving into pressure. This is why. Okay, this is why, because the system's gone, whoa, freeze. Then what happens is you erupt in anger, okay, when you realize that you've been giving more to something than you've been receiving. Okay, then you get angry. You think, whoa, blah, blah, blah. It comes out. And you think, well, I do express my feelings. But it happens when you feel that you've been giving more than you've receiving. And then it's that kind of crushing, whoa, what happened there? Don't like that part of me. Whoa, uncomfortable. Also what happens is what's called your interoceptive awareness also turns off. When that freeze is locked, your interoceptive awareness turns off as well. What does that mean? It means you can't notice when your body is talking to you. Okay? Hence, reason why you get sick and tired. There is also less activity in the cortex, an area of the brain. Okay? What does that mean? It also means that self-reflection is tricky. What does that mean in terms of your life? Well, it means that you then react too fast. The sensitive part is going, whoa, and then it's the whole, oh, you're too sensitive, because your reactions are too fast. They're hyper alert. Okay. So you then find yourself easily switched to anger and irritation. When that's overloaded and that's overwhelmed, that's what you find yourself in. And then you get yourself into knee-jerk reactions to rejection. Okay, so you'll perceive things as rejection when not necessarily rejection. You'll have a knee-jerk reaction to injustice. You feel immediately, you'll skip in your mind that it must be an injustice, rather than looking to the wider perspective of it, because it will be a knee-jerk. Okay, and you also find yourself having a knee-jerk reaction to disagreements and that feeling of powerlessness in terms of the internal world. Or you go in the opposite direction, okay, and you go into anxiety, withdrawal, and avoiding confrontation at all costs. This is all as a result of what happens when the system goes lockdown, freeze, because of that, didn't know where to go. Okay, didn't know where to go for its essence of survival. So when you go into that position of that direction of anxiety, withdrawal, and avoiding confrontation at all costs, what happens then? You become overwhelmed. Okay, you become overwhelmed with feelings of loss and betrayal, and that is quite intense. Sometimes that feeling of loss and betrayal, you don't know then where you can trust. Okay. And then you find yourself going, whoa! So it's like this kind of swing between under-feeling. So I'm looking for a pen. Hang on. So you then find this intensity of this under-feeling. Okay? So you swing between this sort of pendulum of under-feeling and then going, whoa! Into over-feeling. I think, whoa, where's my balance? Where do I feel safe? Where do I feel my evenness inside? Okay. Add to that, the higher your ACE score, the more likely you'll have inflammatory diseases. Okay. There is countless research matching inflammatory diseases, autoimmune diseases, to childhood adversity. And to be quite frank with you, the higher your score, the higher the instances of that being the case. There is the research is so indicative that in several studies they've been afraid to publish the results because they look manipulated. They're not. They look manipulated because it is so clear. It's very, very, very clear that disruption happens in the system. If you think about it, what is an inflammatory disease? What autoimmune things are inflammatory? Those are things like underactive thyroid, diabetes, IBS. All of those kind of houses of inflammatory things. So is even chronic fatigue. Things like rheumatoid arthritis, things like lupus, all of those are all part of that family. Yes, of course, there are absolutely there are some things that have very strong genetic causes and all of that, and it's got nothing to do with childhood adversity, but the connection between childhood adversity and inflammatory diseases is huge. But if you think about it, what is an inflammatory disease? And heart disease as well. What is an inflammatory disease? What is inflammation? It's bruising. Okay. Yes, all of it becomes, the system becomes stressed, and it goes towards inflammation. It goes towards that chronic inflammation over a long period of time. But if you think about the core emotion, as far as that's concerned, it's to do with bruising. Inflammation is bruising. So it's kind of a reflection of an internal bruising. Certainly as far as my autoimmune diseases are concerned, very, very powerful in how it shows. I've literally, no joke, mine is that I've actually become thick-skinned. Amazing how I've created that. And permanently bruised. So my skin, as an example, overproduces collagen. So a rare autoimmune disease. And what does it mean? Well, it means that I've become thick-skinned. My skin is tight. It's very tight. The skin's tight. And the big collagen deposits stays permanent bruising. So it looks like I'm permanently bruised. Okay, you can't see it right here on camera. But my arms and my legs, it looks like I'm permanently bruised. So it's quite amazing how the unconscious creates reflections of that, that inflammation, that bruising. So why would you have, the higher your ACE score, the more likely that you have inflammatory diseases? Well, it's because the genes responsible for clearing cortisol. Okay, and this is my reference as far as this is concerned is to the one done by the McGill University in Montreal, shows that you're 40% less active. Okay, so those genes that clear cortisol are 40% less active in the brain of those with high ACE score. Okay, so that means that you are significantly more vulnerable to stress. So why tell you all this? Is this depressing? Are you showing me this, Heidi, to depress me? No, absolutely not at all. It means you can do something to change it. Okay, now that you absolutely can see, it's not psychosomatic. Okay, it's not your imagination. There are changes that occurred. There are pathways that deviated. They were things that were set up before you could do anything about them. Okay, what I'm saying to you, and hopefully that you're getting in very clear format, that these things are not your fault. Okay, these things are not your fault. They have been there, not just in your life experience, but they've probably been there through generations and generations, and no one changes any of it until they know what they're changing, what they're adjusting. Okay, so this is about you realizing that you can change something, you can do something to change it, and it's not psychosomatic. It exists. Okay, it does exist. Your experiences, that freeze, that I can't do anything, I've become paralyzed, become feeling powerless, I feel helpless, I feel like I can't do something, I sabotage, I procrastinate, all of those things. There's a reason. Okay, hopefully now you understand what that reason is, but doesn't mean to say that you don't participate within changing that reason. Okay, just type in and let me know what you think and feel as far as that's concerned so far. Okay, you're not weak. You're not weak. You're far from it. You're not a weak person. And maybe, as I say, shown by some of those adversity scores, the number one in terms of for intuitive sensitives, the verbal abuse was high, exceptionally high. Okay, and maybe you've been told that your entire life. Maybe that's what the message has been to you. Maybe it was covert rather than overt in your early life, but then maybe you got into a relationship with someone when it was overt, where it was really quite painful, and it sat in there deep. It sat in there and in a deep way and caused you an immense amount of stress. And you think, well, I must be weak then. You're not weak. You're far from it. You're not weak. Okay? It takes a very brave person, really brave person, to deal with it. Your heritage hasn't. Your heritage hasn't dealt with it at all. Okay, it takes a brave person, and you found that by yourself. Okay, you found that by yourself. You had some deep thing within yourself to say, do you know what? There's something that I need to adjust, that I want to change, and you went and found that yourself. Okay, you went and did it. Something within you wants that different. Okay, and that takes a brave person. Of course you're brave. You wouldn't still be listening to me. You would have gone, oh, da, 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 da. You're still listening to me. So therefore, in my opinion, that takes one very brave person. Okay, you're far from weak.